Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to AFSA. I'm Bob Silverman, and I'm very pleased to welcome you. And I'm so pleased with our partnership with the Public Diplomacy Alumni Association. It's a new partnership. This event, this speaking event with Dr. John Zogby is our first public collaboration. We've done other things as well, but I'm really pleased. I really look forward to working with the PDAA and their team, and Jim and the whole group. They're also AFSA members, and so welcome to this event. The next event, should I say, is we are co-sponsoring a talk with former Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, P.J. Crowley. That'll be on April 16th, right in this room. So let me just say, I'm so interested in today's topic. You'll see that John has come out with a book on understanding, managing, and unleashing the potential for our millennial generation. I have a couple millennials in my very household. I'm very interested in understanding them. I'm super interested in managing them. I'm not going to unleash them as yet. But I want to hear how that could work in the future. So without further ado, let me introduce Mike Schneider, the president of PDA.
Yes. Bob, you don't want to ask. What is that phrase? Don't ask. Don't.
Right.
Once unleashed, it's out of control. Welcome everyone. Greetings. Thank you for coming out in this weather, and thanks to the American Foreign Service Association for co-sponsoring this event. There is a community of interest in public diplomacy. It's growing. Our colleague Don Bishop and the Public Diplomacy Council, PDAA, American Foreign Service Association. I understand that the Historian's Office in the Department of State is considering a volume on public diplomacy, and certainly looking at the public dimension of U.S. diplomacy in many ways. So we're really very fortunate that John Zogby can join us, coming also from the Maxwell School. I have to claim John as a Maxwell alum, which is wonderful for us. I'm also a groupie. John puts out weekly a kind of a report. He gives the president or the administration a grade, and it's fair, it's honest, and from my standpoint, it's very balanced. And so, if you're interested in that or the polls, he is one of the foremost pollsters, survey researchers in this country and in the world, both domestically and internationally, which is what makes this volume so important. Now, I have to warn you, my graduate students, when I was making some generalizations based on some of your writings, didn't cotton to that. They were not comfortable with being called millennials. So I'll have some questions and so on. But I think that's fair game, isn't it? It's broad, but it's very important. Dr. Zogby has done a number of polls. He's credited with getting the presidential elections right consistently in many of the last recent times, which is quite an accomplishment. And he has served on a number of boards and written widely in most of the published sources. He's polled for spectrum of business, for media, for government and political groups. And he is also serving as a commissioner for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, a commission on smart power, which was really an interesting study. That was a combination of Joe Nye and Rich Armitage. The now Vice President at CSIS, Craig Cohen, chaired it. It's not out of date. The report was issued quite a while ago. And it's funny, I was talking to Craig about this just a few weeks ago and sort of suggesting that there'll be some renewal. So we have more to talk about. With that, I'd like to, on behalf of all of us at SEMA, welcome Dr. Zogby and look forward to your conversation. Thank you.
Do I need the microphone or for that? Okay. Well, thank you. I have to tell you that coming in from Utica and then Syracuse, when I hear a welcome to people coming out in the bad weather, this is spring, let me assure you. It was 10 below last night, and if anyone tells you, because it was 10 above on Saturday, oh, there's no difference between 10 above and 10 below. Let me assure you, in my strongest Jack Kennedy term, there is a difference between the two. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. we're selling my book, and in fact, we're just going to tell you that whatever we have back there, I don't want to take any books back. So they're $10 a piece, 2 for $15, whatever, just take books. It's not too early for the Eid, Father's Day, Christmas, whatever. In exchange, I'm going to give you hope, because this is what gives me hope. And it is, in fact, our millennial generation. Now, I sort of feel standing up here like, remember that old ad, the Hair Club for Men? You know, that I'm both president of the club and a client. I have 3 millennials at home. So I had to deal with this personally before I came to grips with it professionally. I mean, when our kids say, Dad, you truly do not understand, this is the first generation of kids who are absolutely correct. We really don't understand. I have one with a I don't have one with a tattoo. I have one with tattoos. I still do not understand. Someday he will. And somebody's going to make a fortune removing those tattoos. With that said, let me tell you how I came about all of this. The Foreign Policy Association, a wonderful organization based in New York that does the great debates in communities all over the country on major issues, predominantly foreign policy issues, commissioned us, at the time Zogby International, to do a series of polls on, well, how do Americans actually feel about these issues? You know, it's one thing to have great debates in the community, but, you know, let's ground this a little bit. And so we did 3 surveys, a total of 3,000 American adults were polled, about 150 questions, the range, everything from America's role in the world to American attitudes towards other countries, and Americans and their attitudes towards their culture versus our culture versus other cultures in the world, to issues like trade, to issues like just a myriad of things, 150 questions. And I looked at the results, and not surprisingly, in almost every instance, if you looked at the overall attitudes and opinions, America was split right down the middle. Pretty much everything. That's no surprise. That's where we're at. But in 2002, when we did these surveys, what we did was I looked at various age groups. What I discovered back then is that if I looked at those who were 30 years of age and older, there was a fundamental agreement on everything, give or take 7 or 8, 6, 10 points, but they were in the same ballpark. And then all the way over here, completely and totally different on everything, were those who were 18 to 29 years of age. It wasn't even close. That's when I started to look. And that's when I started to consider that maybe this wasn't an aberration. These were 3 surveys in a row. Those things can happen. Let me take a look. Let me take a closer look at this age group. And so it's been a little over a decade that I have been looking at these millennials, those born after 1979. And let's put this in context. The book came out about 6, 7 months ago. We're looking at those 18 to 34, so 1979 to 1993, but we're well into those born between 1979 and 1995. Understand this and their importance, that when I wrote the book, we were looking at about 70 or 71 million Americans. We're now looking at about 76, 77 million Americans. There are 78 million of us baby boomers. And barring any catastrophic event that totally changes the mindset of teenagers today, we're looking at probably the largest age cohort. And so they are extremely important. I just used the term age cohort. Let me explain that before we go any further, and then you'll understand even more in terms of the context of what I'm talking about. There are age groups. That is where we all are in the life cycle. 20-somethings are always 20-somethings as an age group. It's all about me, how I look, what am I wearing, is it cool, does she love me, does he really want to go out with, oh, me, 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 me. That's 20-somethings. And sadly, I think that so much of the criticism of today's millennials is actually a criticism of them as what they are in the life cycle. Me. They're 20-somethings. And then as you mature into the 30s, the relationships are somewhat developed, careers somewhat developed, a stronger attachment to the community, and then 40s and 50s and so on. But an age cohort is what happens when history intrudes upon teenagers and 20-somethings and is formative, makes them something in terms of values and outlook that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. So I note in the book, when I was in college, in the 60s, I had a favorite economics professor, Dr. Kenny, as an economist. And he used to regale us with these stories, but one of them really stuck. And it was about how he and his friends, the guys, were sitting in a dorm room talking a Saturday night, December 6, 1941. And they were talking about girls and nylons and ankles and knees and girls and sports and beer and girls. That's what 20-something guys do. But he said Monday morning, December 8th, they were all standing in line to register for the selective service. They were not born the greatest generation. They became. History had intruded on their lives, as it did with boomers. I call us Woodstockers, incidentally, because Woodstock was like the ultimate testimonial to my generation's, our generation's self-indulgence. In fact, I was at Woodstock, and I remember you. When my wife told my 3 sons that Dad was at Woodstock, I lost all moral authority. But it was those fire hoses. I mean, we grew up in the Cold War. America was superior, but there were the fire hoses. There were the civil rights demonstrators. There were getting beaten up in Selma. There was a war, and we had opposed the war. And it changed us. And even though ideologically we boomers and Woodstockers are kind of all over the place, in fact, even tilt conservative in some ways as we tilt liberal in other ways, those values were formative in the 1960s. And so today's 20-somethings and early 30-somethings, what's been formative for them? Number one, first and foremost, technology. Absolutely technology. Now let's draw the continuum here, and let's go back to the early technology. It's going to be MTV. I saw MTV evolve from playing music videos to doing news, and doing news about Amnesty International and Greenpeace, and doing news about how other people in the world were being treated and how they coped. These kids were developing and interest in the rest of the planet as children. As that technology continued, it only enhanced a planetary sensibility that they were developing. So technologically, as we move from MTV to the internet, and then from the internet to mobile technology, what we're seeing is the entire world is now at their fingertips. Now, what does that mean? They may not be the smartest in the world, and they're not. And a lot of us challenge them because of that. And I've said this in hundreds of places, hundreds of times. They may not know where Darfur is on the map, but the difference between them and us is that they know that there is a Darfur on the map. And that, think about when you were 18, 19, 20, and 21. That whole world is before them. So technology is number one. Number two, this is the first age cohort that played more soccer than Little League baseball and Pop Warner football. Now that's something. I remember, my oldest is 35, and I remember when my wife and I signed Jonathan up for soccer. And I, of course, became coach because they'd gotten all the way down to the Z's and nobody else would say yes. And so I became coach, and I remember one of the fathers coming up to me afterward and saying, "John, I expect you to teach these kids the fundamentals of the game of soccer." Did you play soccer when you were a kid? I didn't. I didn't know anything about it. Kick the ball and don't get hurt, that's all, basically. But these kids developed in soccer, and then I hear them talking about Manchester United. And I hear them talking about clubs in Brazil and Argentina. A whole new world. When I was growing up, was it made in America? Did it have a union label? As these kids were growing up, it was Versace. It was Tommy Hilfiger. It was United Colors of Benetton. It didn't matter where it was made. What mattered was it cool? And did it cost more than it should? Global music. You know, hip-hop, many of us are still in a time warp and think hip-hop is music of the African-American community. And it was, and that's how it started. But hip-hop today is such a blend of so many different global strands of music, it can't rightly be called anything else except global music. And this is the context in which they live and operate. So, technology is the first thing that intrudes upon their lives and gives them this planetary sensibility. The second historical development is 9/11. And the sense that these horrific events, which unlike Pearl Harbor, are on television over and over again, and hence experienced by millions and millions of people, and the sense that I had, just observing as an historian, is that, you know, the same thing's going to happen to our kids that happened to Dr. Kenny when he was in college. They're going to turn outward. They're going to want to. They're going to want revenge. They're going to want to attack back. And so I launched a series of surveys as soon as we could get people on the telephones and felt comfortable enough around September 19th or 20th that we could actually ask people some questions. We asked a lot of questions. But among the things that we asked were considering the reaction to 9/11 was, what's the proper course? And it was young people who came back and were not ready yet for revenge. Instead of turning inward, like the greatest generation, most of them were turning outward and saying, who are these people? I want to know more about this. How do we go to war against people who are just like us? That's the difference between our first global generation and the rest of us. They have fewer and fewer people in the rest of the world who are the other. And it's hard to hate innately, and it's hard to go to war automatically against someone who is not perceived as the other. They play the same sports. They wear the same clothes. They listen to the same music that we do. So let's get into some polling numbers. 66% of our millennials have a passport. That's the entire age cohort that is 18 to 35 now. Have a passport and have traveled abroad. 35%, twice the next age group, who are in their mid-30s to their mid-40s, Generation X. I call them 90s. But 35% of our first global citizens expect to live and work in a foreign city at some point in their life. Not hope or wish, they expect to. 62% say that it's important, very or somewhat important, to be fluent in a foreign language in order to further their career. 33% say it's very important to be fluent in a foreign language. Now, are that many studying foreign languages or becoming fluent? No. It's only that for the first time there is a revolution in the aspirations of young people. There is a recognition that perhaps we need to be fluent in something other than English. When we ask them, is American culture inherently superior to the culture of, and then there's the list, Southeast Asia, China, South Asia, India, and so on, and the Middle East, Islam, Latin America. In every instance among these first globals, it's 41 to 47% who say American culture is inherently superior. Now that may not seem impressive, except that when I go back to those born between 1926 and 1945, and it's upwards of 72, 73, 75%, my fellow baby boomers, Woodstockers, where it's in the 60s and high 60s, to the Nikes, the Generation X, where it's in the 50s and low 60s, it is incredible by way of comparison that young Americans don't share necessarily that worldview. Now here's something that I think you're going to find very intriguing. This is not in the book. It came afterward. It's part of a Forbes. I read a weekly Forbes article. And I'm happy to send you this to circulate it. We asked favorable, unfavorable attitudes towards 21 countries, from the UK and Canada and Germany and so on, to Iran and Egypt and Jordan and so on. Overall, and this was just among 18 to 26-year-olds, absolutely no surprises. You could almost pin the tail on the donkey and know what's going to be number 1 and what's going to be number 21 in terms of favorable attitudes. Here's the piece that I found really incredible, and I have since repeated it. And that is that I followed up with, now I'm going to read you each of these countries again. And I'm going to ask you, if you were asked to serve on location for 1 year as a goodwill ambassador in each of these countries? Would you go at the drop of a hat? Would you initially say you'd think about it, but ultimately say yes? Or would you not consider it at all? And in every instance, the willingness to be the goodwill ambassador exceeded the favorable attitude towards the country. I found that absolutely astounding. But it wasn't just that. Look, kids love Brazil. And 2 points more are willing to serve as ambassador to Brazil to the 66% who have a favorable attitude towards Brazil. But when 14% have a favorable attitude towards Iran, and 23% say, I'm willing to be a goodwill ambassador to Iran if asked, that is astounding. And that's something that we need to capture here. We need to ask a whole lot more about it. And when we talk about, and I was on a little bit of a task force, I met a couple of months ago with a small group of people about, quote, the Foreign Service going forward. This is among the stuff that I raised. Capture and somehow captivate that planetary outlook, that desire for mobility that young people have. Let me talk just a little bit more before we get into Q&A and commentary. This is a group that wants to change the world. 85% say that they want their legacy to be that they have made a difference, made this planet a better place. All right, what's that mean? That's twice as high as the next age group. 71% say, I want to work for an entity that affords me the opportunity to make that change. This is among the revolutions in our midst. I remember, I've been a pollster a long time, 30 years now. And I remember, my living was always made on corporate work. The presidential races were fun, especially when you get them right, I have to tell you. When you don't, then you're sort of in a fetal position for the next 48 hours. But when we would deal with companies, Fortune 500 companies, in the late 90s, early part of this millennium, and they'd say, and oh, by the way, while you're testing this in these African countries or in the Middle East, we have these little programs that we call corporate social responsibility, and we'd like you to test these to see if they're working. Well, my glory, what a revolution. What brand, big or small or medium, does not have CSR as an essential ingredient to who it is? Everybody's green, right? Everybody is for human rights. Everybody is against child labor. Everybody. This is the age cohort that's going to hold their feet to the fire on that. Here I think there's so much more. 62% say it is very important to support, that they individually support a global charity. Understand again, that's more than twice the level of the next youngest age cohort. Now, let me just suggest this to you. And if you're not familiar with this book, this is your assignment after you've read mine. No, you've bought. Parag Khanna. Do you know that name? Does anybody know that name? You should have him here. Young intellectual, the New American Foundation. how to run the world. I hate the term paradigm, but he has a whole new paradigm for how decisions will be made, how foreign policies are made, how you conquer smallpox, how you bypass large bureaucratic organizations. And what Parig is onto is what I have discovered in my polling, focus groups, and experience. Our young people have no concept of hierarchy or vertical orientation whatsoever. I mean, I've always kidded about the fact that when I was, my son owns my company now, but when I owned the company, I'd come back from a trip, the old ladies in the call center would say, "Nice to see you, Mr. Zogby." And the interns would say, "Yo, John." You know, I mean, there's no sense of proportion here whatsoever, because they got to say "Yo, John" once. I should point that out. But my point is that when a problem comes to us, when something requires a solution, we automatically move it up the chain. We go, our supervisor, the assistant vice president, our manager, whoever it is that is the next in line, and you move it up the chain. And typically, in bureaucratic fashion, 6, 8 months later, everybody forgets about it, hence the problem is solved, because everybody forgets. These kids have a sense of immediacy, and they are horizontal. A problem is raised, a solution needs to be made, then I go horizontal to my network. Somewhere out there is a solution. And my network then in turn goes viral and takes it to their network. And why is this important? On a personal level, I'm asking people to think, to make decisions, to help me find a solution they're going to respond. It's also important because by going out and coming back, I'm not only going to find a solution out there, but I'm also going to build consensus on it. So they are anti-bureaucratic. They are non-hierarchical. They are changing the face and the nature of our workplace. In a few years, they will be 30% of our workforce. By 2028, they will be 31% of the vote in the United States, as opposed to 18, 19% of the vote. Where are they politically? They lean heavily Democrat, but they're not Democrats. Why? It's more accurate to say they're not Republicans. There is too much about the current state of the Republican Party that bothers them. Most notably, personal social issues. Most notably, privacy. The motto for millennials when it comes to privacy is, I will screw up my own privacy. Don't you invade my space. They have a real fear. They're very libertarian in that sense. But in addition to that, if you just look at the 2012 election, 2008 election, of course, they provided an extra 2 million voters that elected Barack Obama. In 2012, as part of the Obama coalition, there were issues going right into the weekend before the vote as to whether they were going to actually turn out to vote. And ultimately, what happened, it was like the dam that broke, is that young women turned out to vote. It is high a number, high a percentage as they voted in 2008, and 71% voted for Obama. When I polled afterward in the post-election survey, young women admitted it wasn't so much that they voted for Obama as that they had voted against the GOP, which scared them on a number of social issues. So, do Democrats have them in the bag? The short answer is no. Republicans have an awful lot of homework, though, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to capture young people. I think that may be lost, and lost forever. But let's not end on a political note. Let's just end on the note that we need to embrace this. There is no other way to handle it. The most dangerous words in our language, whether you're in government or politics, in the corporate C-suite, in the church, in the Boy Scouts of America, the most dangerous words are, we're going to continue to do things the way we've always done them. I'm going to tell you that doesn't work. It's not going to work with them. Thank you very, very much.
Absolutely, sure. Yep. I wonder how many of your polls are construable in terms of the difference between point prevalence and period prevalence. That is to say, you know what I'm driving at.
Yep.
How many of the 50-year-olds felt that way and reported it when they were in the earliest age group?
Remember, we've got to separate out life cycle, where there is a sense of liberation. I can do anything. I can smoke when I'm 20, because the cancer won't come for 35 or 40 years. You know, I'm invincible. There is always that sense. What's different about this age group is they truly are planetary. The world is their playing field, and that is their world. And let's list, and look, how are you going to keep them down to the farm after they've seen Paris? That was young people in the 19-teens and who came back as the lost generation, because it was World War I who defined who they were. How about the guys that went over and the gals that went over to Vietnam in the 1960s? What happened was they went over. They went to Fort Benning, Fort Dix, and to Vietnam, and they came back, and many of them not only didn't know where they were on the map, but they learned no appreciation of the people they fought against as an equal culture. These kids are still 20-something, and there's still more that can be formative for them in their lives. You know, another catastrophe of some sort, to be sure, but history has intruded upon them, and they are global in their mindset, and no other age cohort has been this global.
But did you measure those earlier?
No, I wasn't around to do it. I only see them now in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Fair point, but as an historian, I think a fair point to counter with as well.
Dr. Zogby, I'm not sure if you watched the Winter Olympics on NBC.
I did.
My kids are 12, 9, and 6. Their favorite part of watching Olympics weren't necessarily the games, but that one ad by one of the car companies that showed the couples playing music in different parts around the world, in India and China, in the United States, and that for them, that resonated the most. You know, you have the Olympic Games, big international event, but what funnest for them was seeing this ad over and over again. And I'm just wondering, what do you think of the role of immigration on the millennials? Because when I grew up in a small town in California, we had maybe a couple Japanese American kids at my high school. Now there are Armenians, Azerbaijanis at the same school. There are Arabs, there are Muslims, there are Kurds, you know, lots of different groups.
I go back to work that I've done over the years, about 15 years in a row, for Hamilton College, which is right in my backyard. And we polled young people, sometimes 18 to 25 years of age. Now we're going back to the late 90s, into the millennium. But this one stood out. This was December 2004. It was right at the end of the semester. And we asked an open-ended question as part of the survey. This was to 18 to 29-year-olds. What will America look like 20 years from now? And the number one offered response, this is December 2004, Senator Barack Obama. Now this is 4 or 5 months after his speech, right? Why? Because he looks just like us. And so essentially, let me just give you the demographics on this. Boomers, we are 81% white. The three Zogby brothers, Jonathan, Ben, and Jeremy, ages 30 to 35, are 62% white. My little Minnie, who's going to be a year old next week, is 48% white. That's a whole different world in a whole different context. And while it's not post-racial, it's evolving. It's evolving. Yes?
So you're saying the political class doesn't get this?
Nobody does, just yet. Who does get it, you know, obviously, this is a strength and a weakness. The president and his team know how to get them out to vote. They just don't know what the hell to do with them once that they sorry. But no, I mean, all of us, we have a lot of catching up. We have a lot of catching up to do. And it's kind of remarkable to me that I've been talking about this now since my first book came out, and in 2008. And I say to my wife, one of these days I'm going to go to a group and they're going to say, oh, we heard all this already. But we're still playing catch up, still trying to figure out who they are and just how different they really are. And look, do I want to give away the keys to the kingdom? Do I want to say, hey, look, this is how we've always done it? I can't anymore. You just really have to throw your arms up and embrace them and their decision-making prowess. Now, look, funny story. Sometimes it gets silly. I heard this at the University of Wilmington. There was a dean at the university who sits on a statewide Delaware task force for the workplace. And one of her colleagues was the chief of operations for the state police. And he came into a meeting one morning, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but I had a 23-year-old state trooper call in and 45 minutes before his shift and say, I can't come in today. Why? Because the video game that I'm playing, my team is invading Mogadishu, and they absolutely need me. Now I said, okay, stop and think, John, okay? So I did, I stopped and well, look, there's no excuse for that, but one of the things we have to understand is these kids are growing up with multiple realities. Multiple realities. And this is something that not only makes him feel important, but it changes the rules. Now, one of the things that's the rules as we've always had them, one of the things that I'm learning is that, you know, kids who have autism and Asperger's, psychiatrists, psychologists are now saying, hey, we can reach them. They're actually talking to us by sharing with us their second life, their life online. Well, look, I'm old and silver-haired, and I'm trying to come to grips with that one myself. However, I'm just here to say to you that that's out there. And I can't even remember what your question was, but somewhere. Okay. All right, so here's what we're going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay. Sir, thank you for this. I agree with you on the sense of world geography, but it seems to me, in talking to students in this age group and everything, they have no real sense of world history. And is this something that I worry about a lot? I mean, you know, they're surprised that there was a First World War. They can't put Vietnam within 20 years of when it actually happened. And so if you have this sort of world view, but you have no world history, it seems to me you're heading for a disaster.
Until you said heading for the disaster.
Okay.
I am a historian, and I taught history for 24 years. And I guess I've come to the appreciation that maybe tabula rasa is not so bad after all. Now, would I prefer that they master history? Sure. Did we boomers master history? No. Did Generation X master it? No, neither did they.
I think we did better, though.
Well, I'm not sure. There is, I mean, I went to school with a lot of meatheads. We all did. Yeah, I don't think they're any smarter, and I don't think they're any dumber than any other class of college student or 20-something.
I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on the impact of technology. I can see how the world is more present, as you described it. Then I think back to the 50s when suddenly we had television. No pictures, suddenly we have pictures around the world brought to us on a little box, and the transistor radio, where someone who's as remote as you can imagine can suddenly be in contact with the outside world. And I asked myself, why wouldn't that impact be as great or greater than today?
At that moment in time, that impact was huge, and I don't think we even still understand the power of television. But let's think back and remember that the John Cameron Swayze's cavalcade of news was 15 minutes. And the Korean War was tape that was 2 weeks old, and most of it was handing out cartons of cigarettes to vets who were in the VA hospitals to cheer them up. Transistor radios, different, far different from what we used to call ham radios or short circuit radios. And how many people were on short circuit radios? Now, shortwave, I'm sorry. The point being, this technology is pervasive. Hey, I made a transition in my business to doing polls online. Got a lot of criticism for it and said, look, I'm ahead of the curve. So as I look today, 94% of American households are online, and 97% of likely voters are online. And, you know, you may have had people with television sets, but they weren't tuning into the world. It was far different.